Chapter 8. They pulled into the car park and filled the remaining 4 spaces in the row right next to the Costa Coffee branch, housed upstairs in Next, the clothing store favoured by Electra. She found their clothes fit just right in a way that those from Zara, M&S or the supermarkets did not. The men just bought from where they were at the time, none of them paying much attention to fashion. All 3 were single at the time, so it didn't feel like they had the support of a fashionable woman to help them make all the right decisions. Augustine in particular wanted a woman who knew her way around the fashion scene in his life, but he didn't have much time for dating. Maybe in the near future he would make time and just get on with it, he told himself. The Costa was in the sweet spot of not too busy and not too quiet. Electra loved it like this. She always wanted a seat near the window, so she could look out on the world, but didn't want to be the only one sat there. It was her go-to place when she had a day off and very little to do, sitting in a seat for a couple of hours, reading a book or browsing through the newspaper and completing as much as she could of the crosswords. Her mother was going through the opening exchanges with dementia, and Electra had carried out research on how to stave off the illness. As much as this research was for her mother, she also wanted to ensure that she was in the best possible place to fight it herself. Using different parts of the brain allowed the brain connections to rebuild. This was part of the fight back against the disease. Learning a new language or musical instrument were also high on the recommended lists she had witnessed on the internet. She learned on Google as much as she could, but also understood that not every word written on the internet was gospel. She told Augustine what she wanted and then walked over to secure a table before the lunchtime rush swallowed all the good ones up. As Electra sat and settled, she noticed Gary's car in the car park on the other side of the road. He was sat in the passenger seat, presumably tucking into his KFC. She knew that people often needed time away on their own, but she wished that Gary would spend more time with the team outside of the confines of the role. She didn't get on with work Gary at all and wondered if social Gary was more likable. She doubted it. She watched intently as Gary took bite after bite from his food. It amazed her how quickly he was ready for the next mouthful of food after the last. She counted. 4 seconds. It meant that he wasn't eating properly, as far as she was concerned. Electra laughed internally. It reminded her of a joke her grandfather used to tell her all the time. It was funny the first few times, then it grew tired. But now he was gone, she would give anything in the world to hear it again. She retold it in her head, mimicking her grandfather's voice as she did. A man walked into the doctor's with a carrot sticking out of one ear, a stick of celery protruding from one nostril, and a parsnip in the other nostril. He said, "Doctor, I don't feel very well. What's wrong with me?" The doctor replied, "You're not eating properly." Electra was ready to fall about laughing. Her grandfather would back this up with a throwaway phrase like, "The old ones are the best ones," or the like. In the last few years of his life, she listened to each joke like it was the first time she had ever heard it. Most people passed his jokes off as something they heard decades ago, which was more than likely the truth. But she listened with new ears. It strengthened a bond between the two of them that was forged in her youth. She went back to watching Gary devour his meal. Maybe this was why the rest of them gave him stick about following him into the toilet. She had the privilege of using a different lavatory to the rest of the team, due to her gender. Gary left a smell that the others would make a big fuss over. Without chewing his food, 20 times for each mouthful, she had been taught, there was little wonder that what left his backside was abominable. It hadn't started the journey in the right way. How was it expected to reach its destination in the correct condition? Augustine had offered to get the food for the rest of them, even texting Gary to bring his receipt back from KFC, so he could give him the cash to pay for his. It was his way of looking after the team. None of them needed the money, but the gesture was well received. He returned with Ash and the food, needing 2 trays to transport the food and drinks back to the table. They all tucked into their food, trying not to talk about the case because they were in public. Electra had the odd glance to the car park opposite to study Gary's eating habits once again. She found in between glances he had gone. She knew that she ought not to be much longer. It felt like poor form for her to get back to the office much later than someone else doing the same job. Even Gary. They were part of a team, after all. The food was finished in no time at all. Concentration made their mind and body hungry. They all stood up at the same moment without a word. The place was starting to get busy, and there was much work to do.